Have you ever had a single phone call divide your life into two chapters? One where you still believed certain people would always stand beside you, and another where you realized you'd been standing alone for much longer than you wanted to admit. For me, that call came on an ordinary Wednesday morning. Not during a storm, not in the middle of the night. Just as the coffee maker hissed its final drops into an old ceramic mug I'd been using for nearly 20 years. Funny how life chooses the most ordinary moments to deliver its biggest tests. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 54 years old, a high school baseball coach, and the kind of man who spent most of his adult life convincing himself that avoiding arguments was the same as having a happy marriage. Looking back now, I wasn't keeping the peace. I was sacrificing it, but I didn't know that yet. That morning, my phone vibrated across the kitchen counter. The screen read one simple word: Mom. I answered before the second ring. Morning, Mom. Silence. Not complete silence. Just the sound of someone trying very hard to hide that something was wrong. Finally, she spoke. Daniel. Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. My mother, Eleanor Carter, wasn't the kind of woman who complained. She'd raised me mostly on her own after my father passed away 13 years earlier. She balanced two jobs, somehow found time to attend every school event, and never let me see how exhausted she really was. If she ever admitted she needed help, something was seriously wrong. You okay? I asked, already standing. I don't know. A long breath. My chest feels strange. Every muscle in my body tightened. What do you mean strange? My shoulder hurts. Another pause. And my arm feels heavy. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I'm coming right now. Oh, sweetheart. You don't have to rush. I probably just slept wrong. No. I grab my jacket, unlock the front door and sit down. But, Mom, she laughed softly. Even then, even scared, she was trying to make me feel better. Okay, she whispered. I'll wait. The call ended. I looked through the front window. My pickup truck wasn't sitting in the driveway. It was still at Mason's Auto Repair after the transmission decided to give up 2 days earlier. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Think. Then I remembered. My wife, Lauren's SUV. It sat exactly where it always did. Clean, full of gas, ready to go. Relief washed over me for exactly 3 seconds. Lauren was upstairs getting ready for work. I hurried to the staircase. Lauren! The hairdryer stopped. What? I need your SUV. My mom's having chest pain. I have to get her to the hospital. For a moment, nothing. Then her bedroom door opened. She looked at me with a towel wrapped around her hair. What happened? I don't know. But something's wrong. I'll bring your car right back. She folded her arms. Can't you call an ambulance? I can. But she'd panic. You know how terrified she is after what happened with Dad. Lauren sighed, not sadly, annoyed. I really can't today. I stared at her. What? I have a client presentation. I've spent 2 weeks preparing for it. If I don't have my car, I'll be late. I honestly thought she was joking. I even waited for the smile. It never came. My mother's having what could be a heart attack. Lauren looked away. I'm sorry, but she's your responsibility, not mine. Those 3 words echoed through the hallway. Not mine. No anger, no shouting, just cold certainty, as though she were explaining the weather. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, quietly, like ice beginning to split across a frozen lake. I searched her face one last time, waiting, hoping, begging without saying a word. Instead, she checked the time on her watch. I really have to finish getting ready. Then she disappeared back into the bedroom. The door clicked shut. No slam, no guilt, just click. I stood there for several seconds, staring at the closed door. Then I reached into my pocket. There was one person I knew would answer. My neighbor, Frank Morales, retired firefighter, 70 years old, the kind of man who never asked why before asking where. The phone rang once. Morning, Danny. Frank, I need help. His tone changed instantly. What happened? My mom. Chest pain. My truck's in the shop. There wasn't even half a second of hesitation. "I'm pulling into your driveway in 3 minutes." He hung up. No questions, no excuses, no calendar to check, just 3 minutes. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked upstairs one final time. For the first time in 12 years of marriage, I wasn't wondering whether my wife loved my mother. I was wondering whether she loved me. And as Frank's truck rolled into my driveway exactly 3 minutes later, I had a feeling the hardest part of this day hadn't even begun. When we reached the emergency room, the doctors would confirm every fear running through my mind. But it wasn't the diagnosis that changed my life forever. It was something my mother quietly noticed before anyone else did. And once she made a decision, there would be no turning back. Frank's truck pulled into the hospital entrance just before 8:30. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. There wasn't anything to say. My mother sat quietly in the back seat, both hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were headed to a church service instead of an emergency room. Every few minutes she apologized for interrupting our morning. "I'm sorry to trouble you, Frank." He glanced at her through the rearview mirror and smiled. "Eleanor, after 35 years fighting fires, I can promise you this isn't the worst way I've spent a Wednesday." She managed a small laugh. That was my mother. Even when she was frightened, she worried more about everyone else's comfort than her own. As soon as we stepped through the emergency room doors, a nurse noticed the way she was holding her chest. Within minutes, they had her in a wheelchair. "Chest discomfort and pain radiating into the left arm?" the nurse asked. Mom nodded. The nurse didn't waste another second. "We're taking her straight back." Watching those automatic doors close behind her felt like having the air pulled from my lungs. Hospitals have a strange way of slowing time. Minutes stretch into hours. Every sound becomes louder. Every silence becomes unbearable. Frank sat beside me in the waiting room without saying much. He didn't scroll through his phone. He didn't complain about the wait. He simply stayed. Sometimes the greatest kindness isn't knowing what to say. It's deciding not to leave. After nearly an hour, a doctor in navy blue scrubs walked toward us. "Mr. Carter?" I stood so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. "I'm Dr. Harris. Your mother experienced what we believe was a minor cardiac event." The words hit hard. But then he continued. "The good news is she got here early. That's likely what prevented something much more serious." I finally breathed again. "We'd like to keep her overnight for observation, adjust a few medications, and run additional tests. Right now, she's stable." Stable. I've never loved a single word more. "Can I see her?" He smiled. "She keeps asking when you're coming." A few minutes later, I walked into her room. She looked smaller lying in the hospital bed. Not weaker, just smaller. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside her. She smiled the moment she saw me. "I told you I'd be fine," I laughed. "You've been saying that my whole life. And I've usually been right." I pulled a chair close to her bed. "You scared me." Her eyes softened. "I'm sorry." "No." I shook my head. "Don't apologize for needing me." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I knew you'd come." The words were simple, but they carried 54 years of memories. Every scraped knee she'd bandaged, every baseball game she'd attended, every birthday cake she'd baked from scratch because money was tight, every late-night conversation when life didn't go the way I hoped. She had always shown up. Always. The least I could do was return the favor. We talked for nearly an hour, mostly about ordinary things. The flowers blooming outside her kitchen window, Frank's terrible singing whenever he mowed his lawn, the baseball team I coached. She even asked if I'd remembered to eat breakfast. Lying in a hospital bed, and she was still worrying about me. Eventually, a nurse came in to adjust her IV. "I'll give you a few minutes," she said. Mom watched the nurse leave before looking back at me. "Daniel." There was something different in her voice, the kind of tone that usually meant she had already figured something out. "Yes?" Lauren didn't come. It wasn't a question. She already knew. I hesitated. She had work. Mom stayed quiet. Then she asked gently, "Did she let you borrow the SUV?" I looked down at the floor. No. Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. After several moments, she simply nodded. "I see." No criticism, no anger, no dramatic speech. Just those two words. I see. For some reason, that hurt more than if she'd yelled. Because disappointment spoken quietly always cuts deeper. She looked toward the window. Sunlight spilled across the blanket covering her legs. When your father was alive, she said softly, he used to tell me something. I waited. He'd say, pay attention to how people act when life interrupts their plans. She smiled sadly. That's when you learn what matters most to them. I swallowed hard. She wasn't talking about Lauren anymore. She was talking about me, about the choices I still had left to make. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. Lauren. I stared at the screen. One missed call, then another text. How's your mom? 4 hours. It had taken 4 hours. I locked the screen without replying. Mom noticed. You don't have to answer. I know. She squeezed my hand again. But eventually, you'll have to answer something much bigger. I frowned. What do you mean? Instead of answering, she gave me the same mysterious smile she'd worn every Christmas morning when she knew exactly what was inside the presents. You'll understand soon enough. Before I could ask another question, Dr. Harris returned with a clipboard. Mrs. Carter, your test results look encouraging. We'll keep you overnight. If everything remains stable, you'll likely go home tomorrow. Mom nodded. Thank you, doctor. As he left, she looked back at me. Daniel, would you do something for me tomorrow morning? Anything. I need to make a phone call. An important one. I smiled. To who? She looked out the window again. You'll find out. Something in the way she said it told me not to press. My mother wasn't impulsive. If she'd decided something, she'd already thought about it from every possible angle. I kissed her forehead before leaving for the evening. Walking back toward the parking lot, Frank was waiting exactly where he'd promised. He stood up the moment he saw me. Everything okay? I nodded. She's going to be all right. He smiled. Good. We climbed into his truck. As we pulled away from the hospital, I looked back at the building one last time. I thought the worst part of this story was behind us. I couldn't have been more wrong, because while I was focused on saving my mother's life, she had quietly begun making a decision, one that was about to change everyone's future. The next morning, my mother didn't ask for flowers, better food, or even to go home. She asked me to call someone she'd trusted for nearly 20 years. By lunchtime, that visitor would walk into her hospital room carrying a leather briefcase, and my wife still had no idea that her entire world was about to change. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital just after 8. Mom was already awake. Not only awake, she had somehow convinced one of the nurses to bring her a crossword puzzle and a cup of tea that she insisted tasted better than yesterday's. When I walked into the room, she didn't even look up. 5 letters, she said. I blinked. What? She tapped the newspaper with her finger. Trust. 5 letters. I laughed. Mom, that's 5 already. She looked over her reading glasses and smiled. I wanted to make sure you were paying attention. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, the room didn't feel heavy. That was one of her gifts. She could find a reason to smile in places most people only found reasons to complain. I pulled my chair closer. How are you feeling? A little tired. She folded the newspaper neatly. But I've had worse mornings. A nurse stepped inside to check her blood pressure before leaving us alone again. Mom waited until the door clicked shut. Daniel, remember that phone call I mentioned yesterday? I nodded. Yes. I'd still like to make it. Of course. Who am I calling? She reached into the drawer beside the bed and removed a small address book. Its leather cover was worn smooth from years of use. She flipped through the pages until she found a familiar name. Margaret Ellis. I recognized it immediately. Margaret had been my parents' financial planner for almost 2 decades. She'd helped them prepare for retirement, handled investments, sorted paperwork after my father passed away. What do you need from Margaret? Mom smiled gently. I need to review a few things. I tilted my head. Because of yesterday? She was quiet for a moment. Yesterday reminded me of something. What? That life doesn't send appointments before it changes. I couldn't argue with that. I dialed the number and handed her the phone. Margaret answered after the second ring. Eleanor, it's wonderful to hear your voice. I wish I were calling under better circumstances. Mom briefly explained what had happened. Margaret listened without interrupting. Then Mom said something I hadn't expected. I'd like to review my estate plan. There was a short silence. Has something changed? Margaret asked. Mom looked directly at me. Yes. I finally stopped ignoring something I've known for years. I looked away. This conversation suddenly felt far more personal than legal. Margaret offered to come by the hospital that afternoon. Mom thanked her and ended the call. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, I broke the silence. You don't have to make any decisions because of me. She smiled warmly. I'm not making them because of you. Then why? Because your father and I spent 40 years building a life. She rested her hands on the blanket. Every dollar we saved represented another hour we worked. Every sacrifice had a purpose. She paused. I've realized something. What? A legacy isn't measured by who expects it. It's measured by who values it. Her words settled deep inside me. I thought back over the last 12 years. Family dinners Lauren skipped. Birthdays she'd forgotten. The surgery Mom had gone through alone because Lauren had too much going on. Each memory had once seemed small. Standing alone, none of them looked serious. Together, they painted a picture I'd refused to see. My phone buzzed. Lauren, I let it ring. A text followed. Can we talk tonight? A second one arrived almost immediately. Please answer. Mom noticed my expression. You don't have to decide anything today. I'm not trying to. I know. She reached over and patted my hand. But life has a funny way of making decisions ready before we are. Just after 2 o'clock, Margaret arrived carrying a slim leather portfolio. She greeted Mom with a warm hug before shaking my hand. It's good to see you again, Daniel. You too. She sat beside the bed. I understand you wanted to review your wishes. Mom nodded confidently. I do. Margaret opened her folder. For legal reasons, I'll ask a few routine questions. Mom answered each one clearly. There wasn't a hint of uncertainty in her voice. After several minutes, Margaret closed the folder. I'll prepare the updated documents. She smiled kindly. If you're still comfortable after you've reviewed everything, we'll finalize it later this week. Mom thanked her. After Margaret left, I looked at my mother. You've really thought this through, she smiled. For much longer than you realize. Before I could ask what she meant, my phone buzzed again. Lauren. This time it wasn't a text. It was a voicemail notification. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without listening. Some conversations could wait. The woman sitting beside me couldn't, because time had reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Jobs can wait. Meetings can wait. Phone calls can wait. The people who love us can't always wait. That afternoon, as I helped Mom adjust her blanket, I noticed something peaceful about her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to punish anyone. She simply looked like someone who had finally stopped making excuses for other people's choices. And somehow, that frightened me more than anger ever could. The following morning, Mom was finally cleared to go home. I thought the hardest part was over. But while I was helping her settle back into the house where I'd grown up, Lauren showed up at the front door. And from the look on her face, she already knew about the meeting with Margaret. What happened next would force all three of us to confront truths we'd avoided for years. The following afternoon, the hospital finally cleared Mom to go home. She insisted on carrying her own overnight bag. It weighs less than my purse, she said with a grin. The discharge nurse laughed. I've learned there's no point arguing with you. Not unless you enjoy losing, Mom winked. I've had 81 years of practice. Even after everything she'd been through, she somehow managed to brighten every room she walked into. Frank met us outside with his truck. You look a lot better, he said. I had to, Mom replied. I couldn't let these two boys make all the decisions. Frank chuckled. I've missed that sharp tongue. The ride home felt different. Not because the road had changed, because we had. No one mentioned the hospital. No one mentioned Lauren. Instead, Mom pointed out the first daffodils pushing through the flower beds near the town square. See those? She smiled. They bloom every year, even after the hardest winters. I glanced over. They're stubborn. No, she said quietly. They're hopeful. When we pulled into her driveway, she sat silently for a moment. The little brick house looked exactly as it always had. The porch swing Dad built, the blue shutters he'd repainted every summer, the bird feeder hanging from the maple tree. Everything was familiar. Everything felt safe. "This place still smells like your father," she whispered as I unlocked the front door. Inside, nothing had changed. His favorite recliner still faced the television. His old fishing hat still hung on the coat rack. His framed photograph smiled from the fireplace mantel. Mom reached over and gently touched the frame. "Welcome home," she said softly. Whether she was speaking to herself or to Dad, I couldn't tell. For the next hour, I busied myself around the house. I unpacked her medications, filled a pitcher with fresh water, checked the thermostat, made sure she had enough groceries for the week. She watched me from the kitchen table without saying much. Finally, she spoke. "You've always done this." I looked up. "Done what?" "Taken care of everyone." I shrugged. "That's what family does." She smiled sadly. "Not everyone." The words lingered between us. I knew who she meant. Neither of us said Lauren's name. We didn't need to. My phone buzzed. Lauren. Again. This time there were 6 missed calls, then another text. "Please come home. We need to talk." I slipped the phone into my pocket. Mom noticed. "Still calling?" I nodded. "You should talk eventually." "I know. But not today." She leaned back in her chair. "Today belongs to peace." As the afternoon sunlight filled the kitchen, Mom poured 2 cups of tea. She handed one to me. "Sit." I obeyed. She stirred her tea slowly before speaking. "When your father proposed to me, do you know what he promised?" I smiled. "Probably that he'd love you forever." She laughed. "He did say that. But there was something else." I waited. "He promised I'd never have to wonder where I stood." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He said that when life became difficult, he would make sure I never faced it alone." She looked directly at me. And he kept that promise. For 41 years, illness, financial struggles, family losses, they had faced everything together. No hesitation, no excuses, just partnership. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "You deserve that too." The words caught me completely off guard. "What?" "You deserve someone who runs toward you. Not someone you have to convince." I looked away. My throat tightened. I've been making excuses for a long time. "I know." I kept telling myself she was stressed. "I know. I thought things would change." "I know." Every answer was gentle, never judgmental, just honest. Then she asked the question I'd been avoiding for years. "Daniel, when was the last time you felt truly happy in your marriage?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not because I didn't know, because I did, and the answer frightened me. I honestly couldn't remember. She nodded before I spoke. "That's what I thought." A knock at the front door interrupted the silence. 3 firm knocks. I stood and looked through the window beside the door. Lauren. She stood on the porch, still wearing her office clothes. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was anxious. Very anxious. I turned toward Mom. "Do you want me to send her away?" She took a slow sip of tea. "No. You should hear what she has to say." "And you?" Mom smiled calmly. "I've already said everything I needed to." She stood, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and quietly walked into the living room. Not hiding, not avoiding, simply giving us space. I opened the front door. Lauren looked exhausted. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept. "Daniel," her voice trembled, "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I noticed," she swallowed. "Can we please talk?" I stepped outside, quietly closing the door behind me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Someone from Margaret Ellis's office called this morning." I felt my stomach tighten. They wanted to verify some paperwork. She searched my face. "Your mother changed her estate plan, didn't she?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence told her everything. Lauren slowly lowered her eyes. I never thought she'd actually do it. There was genuine shock in her voice. But beneath that, something else. Regret. Or maybe fear. I couldn't tell which. She looked back at me. Daniel, I made a terrible mistake. I stood there quietly. For years, I had rushed to fill every uncomfortable silence between us. Not this time. This time, she would have to face it, alone. Lauren thought losing her place in my mother's plans was the worst thing that could happen. She was wrong, because the conversation we were about to have wasn't about money anymore. It was about something far more valuable, and by the time it ended, one of us would be walking away from our marriage forever. Lauren stood motionless on the front porch. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had closed the bedroom door 3 days earlier. Her makeup was smudged. Her eyes were swollen. It looked as though sleep had abandoned her the same way she had abandoned compassion that Wednesday morning. She searched my face before speaking. Daniel. Her voice barely carried above a whisper. I've been trying to reach you. I know. You didn't answer. I wasn't ready. A painful silence settled between us. Finally, she swallowed hard. Margaret Ellis called me this morning. I didn't respond. She said your mother updated her estate documents. Her breathing became uneven. Daniel, she removed me completely, didn't she? For a long moment, I simply looked at her. Then I answered. My mother made her own decision. Lauren closed her eyes. So it's true. She leaned against the porch railing as if the strength had suddenly left her legs. I never imagined she'd actually go through with it. I shook my head. That's what you're worried about? She looked at me, confused. What do you mean? My mother spent a night in a cardiac unit. You chose convenience. And the first thing you're asking me about, I paused, is paperwork. Lauren immediately shook her head. No, that's not fair. I've been terrified ever since Wednesday. I've barely slept. I know what I did. I didn't interrupt. For once, she deserved the silence. She wiped away a tear. I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about what my decision cost me. I studied her face carefully. For the first time, it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded broken. The front door opened quietly behind me. Mom stepped onto the porch wearing a light blue cardigan. She looked tired, but there was still something remarkably peaceful about her. Lauren immediately lowered her eyes. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. Mom smiled kindly. I believe you are. Lauren looked surprised. You do? I do. She stepped forward slowly. But being sorry and being changed are two different things. No anger, no accusation, just calm truth. Lauren nodded. I know, Mom continued. When Daniel was 10 years old, he fell off his bicycle. Lauren looked confused by the sudden memory. He scraped both knees so badly he couldn't stand. Mom smiled at me. Do you remember what you asked me? I laughed quietly. I asked if the bike was okay. You did, she chuckled. You were worried about the bicycle while your knees were bleeding. Lauren listened carefully. Mom looked back at her. Sometimes, we protect the wrong things. Those words landed with more weight than any argument ever could. Lauren slowly looked down at her hands. I protected my schedule, my meetings, my routine. She took a shaky breath. When I should have protected my family. Mom simply nodded. You finally said the right sentence. No one spoke for nearly a minute. The neighborhood was completely still. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Wind rustled through the trees. Life continued, just as it always does. Whether we're ready or not, Lauren finally broke the silence. I don't expect you to change your will. Mom smiled gently. I wasn't planning to. I understand. And honestly, Lauren wiped another tear away. I don't think that's what hurts the most anymore. Mom tilted her head. What hurts? Lauren looked directly at me. The look on Daniel's face. When I told him no. I've replayed it 100 times. I've never seen someone lose trust in me so quietly. I didn't deny it, because she was right. It wasn't one argument that had changed everything. It was one answer, one choice, one moment that revealed years of hidden distance. Mom placed a gentle hand on Lauren's shoulder. You made one very painful decision. Lauren nodded. I did. But marriages don't end because of one decision. She looked between both of us. They end because too many small decisions go unnoticed. Those words stopped all three of us, because they were true. This hadn't started on Wednesday. Wednesday had simply exposed what had been growing for years. Birthdays missed, promises postponed, conversations rushed, moments ignored. None of them seemed large at the time. Together, they had become our marriage. Lauren looked back at me. So, what happens now? I answered honestly. I don't know. She nodded slowly. I deserve that answer. I probably do. I took a deep breath. But I need you to understand something. I'm listening. This isn't about the will. It never was. It's about the fact that when the person who mattered most to me needed help, I never had to wonder whether I'd go. I paused. But I did have to wonder whether you would. Her eyes filled again. I know. And that's the question I don't know how to stop asking. Lauren quietly stepped backward toward the driveway. I'll leave. I think that's best. She nodded. Before opening her car door, she looked back one last time. I don't know if our marriage can survive this. I looked at her for several long seconds. Then I answered with complete honesty. I don't know either. She gave one small nod, started the engine, and drove away. I stood on the porch long after her car disappeared around the corner. Mom walked beside me. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she slipped her arm through mine. Come inside. I looked at her. You've had enough heartache for 1 week. I managed a small smile. I think we both have. She squeezed my arm gently. No, she said softly. I think our hardest conversation is still waiting for you. I frowned. What do you mean? She looked toward the family photographs hanging inside the hallway. There are some things your father wanted you to know. And I think it's finally time. That evening, my mother opened a small wooden box that had remained locked since my father's funeral 15 years earlier. Inside wasn't money, jewelry, or legal papers. It was a handwritten letter with my name on it. And what my father had written all those years ago would force me to make the most important decision of my life. That evening, the house felt unusually quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, the peaceful kind, the kind that settles over a home after everyone has finally stopped pretending. Mom disappeared down the hallway for a few minutes before returning with a small wooden box. It was old. The walnut finish had faded over the years, and the brass latch carried tiny scratches from decades of use. I recognized it immediately. It had always sat on the top shelf of my parents' bedroom closet. As a kid, I'd asked what was inside. Dad would always grin and say, "Things that matter more with time." I never asked again. Mom placed the box gently on the coffee table. I haven't opened this since your father's funeral. She rested both hands on it for a moment. As strange as it sounds, I think he knew this day would come. I frowned. What do you mean? She smiled softly. Your father understood people better than anyone I've ever known. She lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, a faded baseball ticket, their wedding rings wrapped inside a handkerchief, and one sealed envelope. Across the front, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 simple words. For Daniel. When he's ready. My throat tightened. I've never seen this before. You weren't supposed to. Mom carefully handed me the envelope. He told me, don't give it to him after I die. Give it to him when he finally understands what real love costs. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. Then with trembling hands, I opened it. The paper had yellowed with age. Dad's handwriting was as steady as I remembered. Son, if you're reading this, life has probably disappointed you. Don't let disappointment turn you into someone who stops loving. The world has enough bitter people. It needs more faithful ones. I stopped reading. My vision blurred. Mom quietly reached over and squeezed my hand. Keep going. I nodded. Marriage isn't measured by the easy seasons. It's measured by who reaches for your hand when life suddenly becomes difficult. If you're the only one reaching, don't ignore that forever. But don't punish people for failing either. Give them the opportunity to become better. Just remember, growth requires action, not promises, not tears. Action. I folded the letter slowly. The room remained silent. Finally, Mom spoke. Your father wrote that almost 20 years ago. He wasn't writing about Lauren. He was writing about life. I nodded. I know. She smiled. So, what are you going to do? I looked toward the window. Darkness had settled outside. I honestly don't know. Mom laughed quietly. That's the first honest answer you've given yourself in a long time. The next morning, I called Lauren. She answered before the first ring had finished. Daniel, can we meet? There was a pause. I'll be there. We met at the small park where we'd had our first date nearly 13 years earlier. The benches hadn't changed, neither had the old oak tree standing beside the lake. Lauren walked toward me slowly. She looked exhausted, but she also looked different, not defeated, humbled. She sat beside me. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, she asked, "Did your mother tell you to leave me?" I shook my head. No. Did she ask you to stay? No. Lauren looked surprised. What did she say? I smiled faintly. She told me to stop making decisions out of fear. Lauren lowered her eyes. I've been thinking. I know. I spent years believing providing a comfortable life was enough. She looked at me. I forgot that people need presence more than presence. Those words caught me off guard. For the first time, she wasn't defending herself. She wasn't making excuses. She was accepting responsibility. I've already contacted a marriage counselor. She reached into her purse and handed me a business card. I made the appointment yesterday. I looked at it. She hadn't waited for me. She'd acted. Then she reached into another pocket. I also requested a transfer. I frowned. What? My new position doesn't require the travel anymore. You love that job. She nodded. I did. But somewhere along the way, I started loving my career more than the people waiting for me at home. She looked directly into my eyes. I don't want to be that person anymore. For several long moments, neither of us spoke. I remembered Dad's letter. Growth requires action, not promises, action. Lauren had taken the first step, not because she'd lost an inheritance, because she'd nearly lost us. I wasn't ready to promise everything would be okay. Trust doesn't return overnight, but for the first time in years, hope quietly returned. I'll go to counseling, I finally said. Her eyes filled with tears. Really? I nodded. One appointment. After that, we'll earn the rest. She smiled through tears. I understand. 6 months later, Mom's health had improved. Every Sunday she still made too much food. Frank still complained about losing at cards. Lauren never missed another family dinner, not because someone forced her, because she chose to. One afternoon I asked Mom something I'd been wondering. Did changing your estate plan teach Lauren a lesson? Mom smiled knowingly. No. It taught you one. What lesson? She looked toward Dad's photograph resting on the mantel. That real wealth isn't what people inherit. It's the character they leave behind. I looked around the room, at my mother's quiet strength, at the family photographs, at the woman beside me who was still working every day to rebuild what she'd broken. Then I smiled, because for the first time in a very long time, it finally felt like we were building something together, not perfectly, but honestly. And sometimes, honesty is where every lasting family begins. The end. If this story reminded you that love is shown through actions, not just words, take a moment to share it with someone who matters. And if you've ever learned a life-changing lesson through family, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that stay with you long after they're over.